Hello people, welcome. Another little video on our lovely inquiry that's going on for the tragic events that happened around Grenfell Tower fire. Some guy's giving a very good account of what's going on in relation to the cladding. This chap here, I don't know who he is, no, doesn't matter. But what I'm more interested in here is the form. The form of this is not a court as such. This is not like a place to get justice. This is a finding of facts. I'm looking at the meaning of the word inquiry, and inquiry literally means like if someone has a query, I have a question, a query. So an inquiry means you have multiple questions, and it's kind of a concept of trying to find the truth of the matter. So when you're trying to find the truth of the matter, you're not actually going to punish anyone. We're going to look at the meaning of inquiry and give my interpretation of it, whatever that might be. But I'm just saying, look at the form of this. If you've ever been to a courtroom before, you wouldn't have, you would have a Judge Judy, Judge Joe Brown, Judge Ryder, take your pick, okay? There's a judge at the top because, if it can be dealt with speedily and quickly by a wise, well-educated judge, then it will be. But this is obviously an inquiry, so the format is different, and it's the format that's kind of taken my interest here. I just want to explain it. So down here, we obviously have a touch typing court recorder, which is very traditional, that someone would obviously write down all the evidence by hand of all the things that the people were saying. I don't know, you've probably got some sort of clerk here. I don't know what these guys are, because obviously this is not a court setting, but it's very similar to a court setting. And the thing that's got me most interested is our good judge here, the Michael Morbick, I think his name is. So Morbick is up the top here, who's been appointed to lead the inquiry, which is, I believe, a judicial function. The judiciary, which would represent the judges, is doing an inquiry as to what went on. Now, the judiciary in England is supposed to be independent, or at least I think the phrase they use is seen to be independent of the government, because obviously the government, the crown, pay their wages, so it's like, and impartial, most importantly. Judges are always impartial. That's a principle that they have to adhere to. And then I'm looking around here. There's quite a lot. I don't know, presume reporters and whatnot. Now these people might be involved in some respect, maybe barristers for parties, maybe so you've got the prosecution and defence counsel in that respect. You might have different parties. I don't think there's any prosecution or defence at this stage, so these would most likely be just the relevant departments that have been asked to come in and give some sort of evidence in relation to what's going on. So this is very much a fact finding, if you like you might have at work or something. So like, come in front of the judge, come in, give your testimony, give your facts and evidence. You might even say testimonies and swore statements just to get a good idea of what is actually happening. But this is in no way going to hold, as it is there in front of you, there is no way that anyone's going to be held to account here. So I just want to zoom out and go to the meaning of the word inquiry. So from like an etymology, which is like a root meaning of the word inquiry. So the early 15th century, which used to be an enquiry, which would be the French kind of spelling, it was later changed to represent the Latin phrase. A judicial examination of facts to determine truth, not necessarily to determine what's true, but determine what the truth of the matter is, that is, from the facts available. So the facts and the finding from the examination will try to build up a picture that will be as closely represented to what actually happened, that would be true, to what as close as can be a representation of what actually happened. So it's a near mirror. So think of it as a mirror. So looking at yourself in the mirror would be almost like a true reflection, in a perfectly unblemished mirror. But the problem is with recollection, recalling information, facts. This comes to witness cross-examination. Is that your memory's not perfect, okay? You're always recalling. There might be colour differences, there might be sound differences, there might be things omitted, things that you might embellish some things, just because that's human nature. So now the mirror, if you like, is starting to tarnish. So just think of like a mirror that has got like rusted edges, the glass might be a little bit dirty. So to get the true image of what happened is impossible. Thankfully with recording devices, it's very clear that machines are capable of recording sound and video very accurately. Thank God, that's an amazing achievement, and it's a useful tool for, especially in court settings. But in terms of like trying to establish the facts and evidence of every minutiae detail around like what happened leading up to the fire in the flat. No one was recording that. No one will ever truly know exactly what happened there. So that, if you like, that part of the mirror will always be hazy, blemished, scratched more than the rest of it. Whereas how the fire spread and stuff, thankfully, was recorded for public review at a later date. So those images, those records, those recordings are almost near perfect, because thanks to technology, they don't degrade over time. They don't fade. So those elements of the mirror that reflects the true, like the absolute truth without question, or the absolute true without question, can only be reflected with a true mirror. And the idea is that no one, like I said, no one can truly know what happened of every single fact on that day, because we can only witness what we hear, see, smell. This allows us to do, and that technology allows us to apply to the true. So this inquiry seems to me is just trying to get the best images as they possibly can to establish. Let's look. Why now is to ask the question, to ask about, to learn, find out by asking, seeking information or knowledge, to conduct a legal or official investigation. Ask about, look into, ask and seeking, seek after, search for, examine, scrutinise the evidence. Is that evidence truthful? Like testimony in particular. The guy's just said he's got like 100 testimonies from, I don't know if they're all from firefighters, but they're all from relevant eyewitnesses and such, that he's got over 100 testimonies, so they will need scrutinising to establish like a pattern, rather than some, there might be interesting evidence there that could be like a little bit more an exception rather than the rule or the general picture painted by the testimony. So there we go. Now I want to go back to, this is the dictionary. So looking at the standard definitions of inquire, an act of inquiring, a question, a query being a question, an inquiry, a close examination of a matter. Okay, now down here we've got a request of information. So someone's actually asking. So the Government Policies Department, an investigation, especially a formal one, conducted into a matter of public concern by a body constituted for that purposes by the government, local authority or organisation. Okay, so think about that, because there's no doubt in my mind that the Grenfell fire, it was a council run, a local government, if you like, run building. Local government were responsible for it. Those local government people are, I believe, legislated into existence to have certain duties, obligations for the very protection of the people that they look after in these kind of buildings. And that legislation roots back to the government, and the government obviously has duties to the Crown. The Crown and the Queen are one, and this all roots back to our lovely monarch, who's Elizabeth Windsor. So you can see how they would be taking this quite seriously, because the government failing, unfortunately, places a burden upon the state, because this is why these people act in with such high standards. Okay, they do, regardless of what you think of the government. The admin and the quality of their work has to be, as high as can possibly be achieved, at least at a human level. So there's that element of it. So that's from the government's perspective. Okay, the government, they clearly, no one's trying to say nothing went wrong, and the inquiry will establish the facts that have gone wrong. And they're going to obviously look into an incident, which I thought was an investigation as in an incident. And this is an interesting word, incident, because it's a small thing that, like here, an occurrence that interrupts normal procedure or function, a mishap. All right, and there's also a military reference here about an incident that a usually violent or disruptive occurrence, especially one that precipitates a larger crisis. So what would the larger crisis be? And in this example, so an international incident provoked a war, so World War II, for example. Oh no, World War One. Sorry, to lie. Or was it World War Two? I think it was World War One. Yeah, World War One, where the one of the kings or princes of Austria went into the Yugoslavia land, and I think he got shot and assassinated, and that assassination of that one man led to the whole destabilisation of the European power system, causing wars and millions of people to get killed in trenches. So you can see how that would be the incident. Now you might say, hang on a minute, someone being shot and killed in a royal family is hardly an incident or a mishap. or something, something small, but it is the small thing that happened to create the big thing. And you might even say an incident a mishap in the Grenfell Tower would be the mishap was the electrical device that exploded in the ground floor, or near to the ground floor, the fridge freezer, or whatever the hell it was. So that was the incident, which caused a fire that then caused the inferno. So it's interesting, the choice of words for these things. But then I also want to look at an inquiry angle from what you and I would recognise. And if we go to the legal dictionary here, we just flick across. There's a lot of synonyms, but not really much definitions here. So I was looking through the synonyms in the legal incident, because it's a Latin phrase, so take from that as you will. A thing depending upon, appertaining to, or following another. So the inquiry will follow something else, but the question is with the government, who are essentially liable for the result of this tragedy, are now doing an inquiry into the incident that caused it. So in that respect, it would be like, right, let's look at what this is, because this could be a much bigger issue. Now, obviously, in a liability side of things, I would say, you've had a massive inferno where people have died, and it seems like there's a lot of liability placed on the local government and therefore the national government. And therefore, what is this mishap, as the inferno now is the mishap that is going to create the bigger problem of the compensation and liability for all the people who've been affected by this tragedy. The power of punishing for contempt is incident to a court of record. Oh, that's nice. So now we're all talking about a court of record. Now we all know what a court. Well, I hope we all know by now what a court of record is. But there is something in here which I wanted to just highlight. This is the incident, and now we go back to the inquiry. So this is the dictionary that you and I would we would pick up and understand in lay terms. So if you like, dictionaries. Yeah, I suppose that's what a diction. That's why it's called a dictionary. It's what we're telling you it means. And the legal dictionary is what the legal society is telling you what it means. So we go to inquiry here, and an inquiry is like a systematic investigation, systematic. But then there's associated concepts. This is what caught my eye, and then I thought, a grand jury inquiry. So a grand jury in the good old days used to be a established folk in an area, a council, if you like, a county. These people would meet. They would be typically landowners, typically people of good knowledge, good standing, no criminal records. People who knew right from wrong and generally represented a portion of the county. And the grand jury would be called in. I think they sat for a year. I think. And then they would be disbanded and a new grand jury would be set up. Now the grand jury would be consisting of the constituents of the council, or at least the county. So wherever the geographical areas where this fire took place, a grand jury inquiry is essentially an inquiry by the people, as opposed to the judicial inquiry done by the public or a public inquiry. So you see, there's different types of inquiries. The grand jury can have one, the judiciary can have one, and the public inquiry would be probably a government inquiry. Okay, but the government in this case has taken it out of the public government arena, because it would probably be improper for the government to have an inquiry into themselves, and they've kind of put it to the independent judiciary inquiry. So I think that's about as best a thing that they could have done. But from another aspect is that, in terms of actually getting prosecutions and people's right to a fair and speedy trial, and justice delayed being justice denied. Ever heard of that? The grand jury would be interested in finding the perpetrators, or let's say the decision makers, the agents, because everyone is an agent within the corporate realm. Let's look at the agents that made the mishap, and where did those agents get their authority from to act, and then the principal of those agents would be held to account for the murders. Well, I wouldn't say let's say the killings that happened in the tower, because I think no one can doubt that people were killed in that tower, whether rightly or wrongly. So we don't want to say murder or manslaughter. So, we can't really put those accusations out there. But, there's definitely people have been killed, and it's wrong to kill, as we all know. So there is definitely a liability chain that has to be answered there. Now, the question more for the inquiry is, was there any kind of criminal aspect to it? Was there any negligence aspect to it? Was there any intent? That's an interesting question. Was wrapping people in flammable material enough? And, was the negligence enough to make this almost like as serious as an intended murder, as opposed to an unintended manslaughter? So these are the questions that hopefully the inquiry will get to, and I'm sure was it Michael Moore-Bick has this well and truly in the back of his mind. But I just thought it was interesting, the idea that in ancient times the wise folk of the community could have launched the grand jury inquiry into such matters, where for the benefit of justice for those victims, while running the judiciary inquiry as what lessons the public body can learn, and what lessons the all societies, whether they be people or governing bodies, what everyone can learn. So let's hope the judicial inquiry can do what it can, but it is no way. I'm just worried that this element is the justice side of it, and these two elements are very much intertwined. You also got to consider the complexity of the issue around Grenfell. Now, it's been shown that it is a very complex issue, but juries have shown time and time again that it doesn't have to be complex. It has to be complex for these people's benefits, because these are the people that run the legislation to ensure that materials and combustibility and all the other nonsense, all those things have to be done in accordance to their procedures in terms of commerce, business, and operating in commerce when people go about living their lives. So they have to think about safety and stuff. But in terms of who was in charge of the building, who made the decisions for wrapping that stuff around the building, right? And let's ask some questions of witnesses, and let's bring the people who are in positions of power and authority. Like, if you like, the agents who had the delegation given to them to act in such a manner. I mean, the grand jury would have sorted that out months and weeks. Well, it would have been done within a very short time. But obviously that's not happened. And what we have now is a police investigation. And hang on a minute, where have we gone back to? The police have gone back to, they work for the public inquiry element, and they have a judicial, they have an oath to the Queen, which again brings them into this kind of arena. But in terms of how this is the power of the grand juries that we had, is that they were not public government bodies. They were comprised of the people of that area, and then they could issue out their own inquiry, they could issue out their own orders, they could issue out their own people to come in and testify pretty quickly, and that would have provided the justice that the people of Grenfell Tower want. And unfortunately, the people of Grenfell Tower seem to be in a position where they don't know how to access justice. So it's not like they're being denied access to justice, it's just they don't know how to access justice. So they are denying themselves access to justice, which is quite an interesting thing when the government is there waiting to help them get access to justice. But if you don't have the knowledge inside your head, as to how you can access justice, then obviously you're going to be sitting there and they're going to be sitting there and they're waiting for you to come in and tell them what to do. And that's where we are with this. Now obviously grand juries aren't administrated by the state anymore, so that's an interesting kind of development, isn't it? In terms of checks and balances between state and people. But that's just the way things are at the moment. And I don't see that changing anytime soon, especially if you've got things like disasters like Grenfell happening, which could hold people to account, the grand jury, the power of the grand jury to investigate such things. But would that be a benefit or a hindrance to the other two elements of these inquiries, options if you like, how these other two bodies work?